All right.
I love when family members join our programs.
Yeah, my dad is here as well. Worried for the Q&A portion now.
We'll be sure to embarrass you.
We're going to give folks another minute. I see some more people logging on. Some familiar faces, some new people. All right, well, I think we're gonna have some more folks join us, but I wanna make sure we have plenty of time to hear from our three speakers. We're very lucky to be welcoming three folks here with us. I wanna say hi, I'm Abby King. Wanna welcome everyone to our first Art at Noon in 2022. So today, I'm in a different time zone. Today, we're celebrating Lino Kino and their project at PAFA. And to start, I wanted to respectfully acknowledge that our institutional host and some of our speakers are on the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, whose presence and resilience in Pennsylvania continues to this day. I also have to thank the people that make programs like this possible and free. So the spring Art at Noon lectures are supported by the Leftco family in memory of a beloved member of the docent corps, Mildred T. Leftco. The program that we're here to talk about is the exhibition series that was curated by my colleague, Ellie Clark, who's on the call today too. Hey, Ellie. Is brought to you by is part of our Illuminate the Plaza series, which is brought to you by PNC Arts Alive. So for anyone, our speakers are going to get more into that, but for anyone who is new to that series, it's something we've been doing for the last 6 months or so, where videos are projected onto PAFA's historic landmark building. And so more to come on that series too. We have one more artist coming up. Just a few housekeeping things real quick. We are recording today's event, and I'll be sharing it on YouTube later this afternoon. Our speakers are going to be sharing their screen and talking to us for the next 40 plus minutes, and then we will have time at the end for the Q&A. We've already had somebody say they're worried about the Q&A. We're not. It's going to be wonderful. We love to hear from you. That's why we do these in rooms where we can see folks. So feel free to put compliments, questions, thoughts in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. Lastly, before I welcome folks, I wanted to mention that our next Art at Noon is scheduled. It's on March 9th, and we are celebrating the life of PAFA alum and a really wonderful painter, Mo Brooker, that we lost in January. So if you're free, that'll be another Art at Noon on Wednesday, March 9th. So that's enough of me speaking. I'm now so excited to hand it over to the members of Lino Kino, who are going to introduce themselves and tell you about their project performances and more.
Great. Thank you so much for the intro. My name is Michael Ibsen. I am one of the founding members of Lino Kino. I founded the collective with my friend Booth Carlson in 2018 in Philadelphia. And it was focused on basically creating like an open, easily accessible space to view experimental film and video work that wasn't necessarily a traditional art institution. So we've done a lot of screenings and kind of performance art showcases and things like that, usually in underground or DIY venues, things like that. So very different from how people are used to kind of viewing this work, which is usually in a very formal gallery setting or a museum. So this performance that we're going to be talking about, it's something that we worked on in conjunction with This Won't Last, which is our current exhibit up at PAFA, our current projections, which we'll talk about a little bit. And this performance is kind of grew out of, I think, a lot of ideas that the three of us have been engaging with in our own work. Personally, over the last few years, I've put on a number of performances that are kind of focused on taking kind of everyday activities and decontextualizing them, removing them from their original context and their original purpose, and restaging kind of the mundane and the everyday as performance art. And I've done some performances that involve, say, like I did a performance that involved erasing annotations out of a book, or I did a performance that was like a live translation of a text from Italian into English on a live stream, so people could tune in and watch. And I was kind of trying to turn that just kind of that process and that work into a piece of performance art. And Saskia, who will be introducing herself after me, we worked on a performance this summer where we kind of wrote a movie as a performance, right? We would go live once a week on an internet TV station, and we would basically in 4 weeks, we tried to create a movie, and we created an outline, and we did all this world building and came up with these characters. So that's just to provide a little bit of context of how my previous work is kind of feeding into the performance that you're about to hear about. So Saskia, you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Saskia Globig. I've lived in Philadelphia for about 2.5 years and been a member of Lino Kino for roughly half that time. I have a big dance background. I've just started teaching dance in Philadelphia, and I've been really interested recently in more pedestrian performance work, doing things that do not come from dance technique has become really interesting to me. I also am interested in sort of marginal materials. I love public transit. I love building materials. And I think it's been exciting to try to integrate those filmic interests from my video art and sculpture into performance going forward. So yeah, that's kind of my thought process in this. And Ive, do you want to talk about yours?
Yeah, sure. There we go. I'm Ive Yos, and I'm an artist and a comedian and a writer. I'm the newest member of Lino Kino, and I tend to make work about supernatural phenomena and I guess, it varies a lot, but right now I'm pretty obsessed with UFOs and aliens and kind of the post-truth era and how that intersects with that subject.
Great.
So we have a PowerPoint to share with you.
Yeah, should we just roll into that?
Yeah, and you'll see how all of those things connect.
Yeah, and try to tie all this together.
Yeah, it'll be a big reveal. So, welcome everyone. So I think we want to start with saying that the performance is sort of the other half of our projection installation at PAFA, which other artist collectives have filled before. So in our turn, we were, I think because of the scale of the Frank Furness building and the historic nature, the sort of fame of that building, we got really interested in monumentality and monuments and making works that maybe push at or question or ask viewers to investigate the changing meaning of monuments. So members of the collective each made a new video work. There are 7 new works included in the installation, and we put them through a process of digital degradation, basically compression, so that they get fuzzier and fuzzier over time. And we wanted that to sort of speak to how monuments change both their physical attributes and their context as new people encounter them, and as the demographics of the city shift. So the videos include everything from things about ice skating and winter as a concept to the Hindenburg blimp crash to big shopping malls across the US. So we kind of are thinking about scale and memory and asking the passersby in Philadelphia to see how that fits into their own lives. That is This Won't Last, also in the name, was the title of the exhibition. And I think don't know. I think that's all I want to say about that. But you just missed it. Also, it closed yesterday. That was sorry. And how does
You want
that
me to
tie
take
into
over?
monuments? Yeah.
Great. So this first slide is going to provide some of the key background for both the main inspiration point, I think, behind the video projections that we made and the performance that we're doing. So this slide is meant to illustrate kind of the idea of anti-monuments, which is a phrase that has kind of been increasingly popping up in contemporary art. I've encountered it in the wild a couple times already, which I think means that it's you know, out there in the ether. People are latching onto this idea. Basically, it's about kind of using the making works of art that operate kind of on the scale and in a similar way as monuments and memorials, traditional monuments and memorials that we're familiar with, you know, memorials to historical figures or conflicts are usually the ones that I think most people are familiar with. And taking the attributes and the characteristics of traditional monuments, kind of flipping them inside out, and then seeing what that kind of tells you about how art exists in public space and how people interact with art in public spaces, and also about what exactly goes into making a monument, who gets to make the decision about what gets memorialized, you know, who gets to make the decision about what takes up public space and thus kind of like takes up, is like a physical embodiment of public memory. So in this slide, we've got a couple examples that I'll talk about briefly. In the top left is Karen Oliver's The Battle is Joined from 2017, and that was actually done in Philadelphia through the Monument Lab. In the top right corner, you have Ivan Argote's Etc., which was done over, I think multiple forms of this were done from 2012 to 2018. In the bottom right, you have Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty, which I'm sure is probably the work that the most people are familiar with here. And in the bottom left, you have Alberto Buri's Creto di Buri or Creto di Ghibellina, which is a really fascinating work that is kind of, for me, is the genesis of, you know, this whole idea of using anti-monuments as kind of like a cipher or a source of artistic inspiration. And this is it was a town in Sicily that was destroyed by an earthquake, which is not particularly notable because there are lots of earthquakes in Sicily. Lots of towns have been destroyed by earthquakes, and yet somehow this town in particular was turned into this kind of insane work of land art, monumental art, anti-monument. And if you can tell from the picture, it's basically they covered the remains of the town in concrete, and there's furrows going through the concrete that indicate where the streets were of the original town. So you have this bizarre kind of like topographical one-to-one scale representation of the town that used to be there, and the town is there no longer. And then in the center is another Robert Smithson piece called Yucatan Mirror Displacements, which was done, I think, in the 70s, which is just to show that, you know, Robert Smithson did Spiral Jetty as well. He's kind of shorthand for monumental art, I think, probably the most famous of like land artists. And just to show that he was also kind of engaging in these questions, using some of the similar aesthetic techniques that these other artists have used, particularly with kind of the mirrors that are used in the top pieces. And there's a quote I have really quick from Marica Antonucci, who wrote for Monument Lab about some of these pieces, about the mirrors specifically and the role that they play. And they wrote that the mirrors reconfigure the priorities of memorialization away from privileging acts of human creation to a reverence for and reflection upon the natural world. So I think the important part of that quote is the first part, and it's really about how, you know, in this sense, the mirrors reconfigure the priorities of memorialization. And in our case, you know, we had monumental scale, which is, you know, these large projections, and we filled those projections on a monumental scale with kind of unmonumental things with not really typically memorialized things, and it's all really about getting to that idea of like questioning the priorities of memorialization. So I think I can move to the next slide. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Sorry. So now we get into the inspiration behind this performance, which is kind of like a theory game, I guess, is the shape that it's going to take. And one of our original inspiration points was research about the role that simulation plays in the military-industrial complex, and the kind of the connectedness of fine arts in the military-industrial complex, I think, is a very interesting, rich topic. Maybe underexplored in some aspects, because I think people maybe want to kind of brush it under the rug or sweep it under the rug a little bit. But, you know, especially for someone who's working in video, the history of video as an art medium is completely intertwined with the military industrial complex. Bell Labs is one of the early sites where you see artists being brought in to test early video equipment. And this is, you know, Bell Labs at the time was basically like a subsidiary of the Pentagon, you know, much like you have like Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman now. So now we have kind of these aesthetic inspirations that we drew on. We were looking at military simulations, and, you know, this one on the right looks almost like some sort of experimental, you know, work of installation art or something. You know, the one on the top left is LBJ, I think, planning some sort of field operations in Vietnam using a physical model that presumably had to be made to scale and to be somewhat realistic. So we thought about, you know, who were the artists that were making that, right? The role of artists within the military. And then finally, this more modern example of the infamous Department of Defense PowerPoint slides, which are, you know, people love to laugh at these things because they're totally insane looking. They're the most kind of perfect expression of the whole, you know, business philosophy stuff that people love to make fun of, like, you know, synergy and vertical integrate, you know, buzzword laden stuff, because they go all out with the buzzwords, they go all out with the crazy diagrams, and they end up being kind of very aesthetically cool. And so we started thinking about how we can like kind of think of maybe these more non-artistic approaches to performance and simulation, and how we can kind of like incorporate that into a piece of performance art. So I think the next slide will illustrate that movement.
Can I jump in too?
Huh?
Can I add something?
Please.
Can I add
please,
something too?
Yeah.
I think also the impulse for the performance is that if we have a physical works projected in light, if we're going to make a monument to ideas, performance felt like the best method through which to do that. So we got really interested in, I think war especially was a touch point, because we're like, okay, there's an intense situation. There's a potentially world-changing event occurring, and people are making aesthetic decisions to figure out how to present that to the public constantly. There's an ongoing process of how do you memorialize something before it's over, or as it has constant moments of memorialization and endpoints within a larger endpoint. I think is sort of something that excited me about it, to be like, what is the secrecy and what is the public facing versions of all of these things. So
totally. Yeah, so here's a little diagram that we have. The one on the top is from a book called Modeling and Simulation of Land Combat by J.G. Taylor, which was published in 1983, and it's called The Simulation Spectrum. So it's showing the kind of efficacy of different types of simulations, and also the cost of different kind of simulations and how those things are correlated. So to kind of, you know, we kept that original reference by kind of copying the diagram, but wanted to, you know, de-warify it a little bit, because it's not like we're using this as an inspiration point, but we're not trying to make something that's like, you know, like pro-war or like pro-military industrial complex. It's just, you know, kind of part of our theoretical mode or whatever, is to like adopt these approaches from non-artistic fields. So this is an adapted diagram that I made that's kind of meant to illustrate the same thing, but as it regards to different types of kind of like different applications of theory in art, and how you can do that either from like, even just writing an essay that outlines a theoretical model, creating a computer simulation that illustrates some sort of theoretical idea, all the way to like live action role playing, or deep performance, which is a term that I think I don't know, is not quite clear what that is, but I think we came up with a couple examples, and I think the performance that we're working on specifically is supposed to kind of live on the left side of that spectrum. So somewhere between the theory games and the deep performance. And I guess we should outline a little bit what the performance is supposed to be in the first place. And it's originally titled My Theory, Your Theory. And basically it's supposed to be kind of a work of expanded theater where we as the performers are meant to embody and represent the actual process of forming new knowledge and new ideas, kind of like a dialectical synthesis, right? Where you have like two opposing viewpoints kind of coming together and being synthesized through like a third, either theoretical framework or a third, interlocutor. And what you come up with, the result of that is like a new theory, right? Or a new branch of a theory, or a new branch of like a school of thought. So our performance was going to be a live illustration of that process. And we were going to do that by basically creating an office space that we worked in for a full day. And the work we would be doing would be kind of running through different simulation games, different theory games, and kind of trying to mimic what we imagine to be how these things are gamed out, either in military simulation or in, I don't know, any other sort of non-art context. No.
Do you want to talk about these examples?
Yeah, and these are just a couple more, these are just more illustrations of some of those ideas from the spectrum. So up top this is kind of a more like live action role-playing work. It's Jeremy Deller's The Battle of Orgreave, where a clash between miners and police that happened in the 80s during the miners' strikes in the UK was restaged in 2011 using 200 of the original miners who had participated in that clash. So it's this incredible work of performance art where you have kind of the original people who actually lived this thing that's being recreated, re-embodying their own lived experience as a performance, which is wild on a lot of levels. And then in the bottom, these are kind of theory game examples. We have Situation Labs, The Thing from the Future, which is a pretty fantastic card game that anyone can get their hands on. It's a very cool tool. It's kind of like a speculative design game. And then on the right is Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt's Oblique Strategies, which I think was made in like the late 70s, early 80s. And that's also kind of a theory game that's meant to kind of systematize the creative process a bit by, you have this card deck and you're supposed to draw these cards, and they're kind of very oblique creative kind of commands or forms of guidance that you're supposed to use to kind of like aid you in artistic creation. So these are all, some inspiration points and some diagrams and some historical examples that are inspiring what we're working on.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about why UFOs are a topic for the performance. So I think UFOs are really symbolic of this post-truth era that we're living in. And I completely believe in this concept of relativism, where anyone's truth is just as valid as anyone else's. And why do I believe that? Well, I think there are a lot of examples, with alien visitation being just one of them. And one of those examples is the political polarization of the West, and how political beliefs really come down to what news sources an individual uses. And let's not forget that news comes from news analysts, and analyses are a subjective medium. And another example is the increasing liberation of non-conventional genders. And the meaning of gender can vary dramatically from person to person. It's based in life experience, cultural surroundings, sexuality, et cetera, et cetera. And so back to aliens. So recently, some of you probably are aware that the Pentagon published a report on UFOs in the last few years. And since then, extraterrestrial visitation is becoming a more mainstream concept. And this ontological shift is something that has happened time and time again. The idea of star people visiting Earth has been a belief prevalent in many ancient cultures. And we're just coming back around to it by simply opening our minds to its possibility. And then I'm just going to quote the American folklorist Thomas E. Bullard. He said, to quote him, "The most committed takeover of UFOs for worldview revision originates with thinkers under the influence of Jungian psychology." And picking up Jung's implication that UFOs are too important to be just spaceships, these interpreters recast all paranormal phenomena as a glimpse of some larger reality. It may be the juncture where psychic and physical worlds join, a parallel universe or an imaginal realm, but it is now slipping through the cracks in our everyday continuum, breaking into awareness through altered states of consciousness or gradual weakening of a rational materialistic worldview. In these speculations, UFOs fast change from physical to mental or spiritual roles and back again. And then next slide. Ooh, that's a little glitchy. Okay, thank you. And I want to mention I've written my own mini book recently on relativistic truths called My View of the Cosmos, which sort of functioned as one of the kind of precursors to our upcoming performance. So I'm just going to quote the epilogue to that book. I said, "Aliens are beings from somewhere else in space-time. Certain types of aliens currently accepted as more visible or believable are political aliens from other countries, alien plant species from other continents, and certain alien facets of something that is largely non-alien, like an otherwise normal-looking cat that has one alien trait where it was born without ears. Other types of aliens are more difficult to imagine for some people, like the presence of extraterrestrial aliens. Less believable aliens contribute to the creation of more believable aliens and vice versa. For example, extraterrestrial aliens might be visiting Earth and introducing pieces of DNA at different stages of our evolution to create alien-human hybrids, which are more believable than fully extraterrestrial aliens. At the same time, more believable aliens like political aliens and unfamiliar plant species enable a person to better imagine less believable aliens. An imagined thought is just as real as any other reality. Every imaginable kind of alien is already here. A person can see the alien they choose to see by using different combinations of memory, imagination, and conventional senses to find the information they need. And this performance is part of this continuing effort to develop a more imaginative framework for intellectual inquiry to combat this supremacy of objective materialism. because today there is always someone deciding what our truth is, even if it appears not to be true. We've become interested in work that pulls back that curtain, looking inward and upward. And that's all I've got. Next slide. I think, or am I doing this one too? These are just some posters. Yeah, when we were trying to develop the concept for the performance and what the aesthetic of that would look like. And so, yeah, that's all for this slide.
I think if people are wondering, like, what does this actually look like? We came up with this basically range of activities. There are options of things that we give ourselves to do when we put ourselves in this room. And right now since due to COVID, we weren't able to do the performance at PAFA. We're now scouting other locations. And I think it's a really fun opportunity, sort of as an aside, to do some immersive theater. And we're excited about inviting people to an office floor, like in an office tower, or maybe watching us through at the front window of a store or something like that. But so basically in that space, whatever it is, you have a series of options, and it all builds towards making a monument of ephemera. So basically you can write notes, you can redact notes, you can make copies, you can make booklets, you can have roundtable discussions with people. We feel like this is really important to us. Ive, what were some of the other things you could do? Do you want to talk about that? You could hide things from people, you could show things to people, you can make a speech.
Yeah, if we have some time, at the end, we're going to demonstrate one of these exercises, which is a card game. Towards the vision of papering the room.
Yeah, and I think it's important to stress that material aspect of the performance too, that all these, so basically what we were trying to do is create like a bunch of little kind of discrete activities which the participants could kind of draw from to fill up their time in the performance space, which would ultimately create this kind of like systematized approach to ultimately generating documents. Was kind of the point of this performance, that everything that you do in the space, the end goal of it would be that there would be like a photocopier in the space or a printer or something like that. And once you kind of have, once you have kind of gamed out an idea with the other performers, then you kind of commit it to paper, you make hard copies, and then those hard copies can be edited by other performers to make more documents. But ultimately we track all of our theorizing on paper. And then that sum total of kind of amassed printed material, that becomes the monument, really.
So you walk away with the dossier
aspect of the monument. Yeah, we fill the space with it, and we create this kind of visual representation of ideas, pretty much, of like coming up with ideas, or of theorizing, or of speculation, or of, you know, not like of a non-linear kind of like problem solving process.
And it's a 9-to-5 workday also.
Yes, and it's also very much supposed to be an office. That's an important aspect of this too. We're kind of taking an office and totally decoupling it from any sort of actual like business process, any sort of like commercial process. And so thus the office place becomes like the, you know, the stage of the theater or the performance space or whatever.
But I think towards the end also, maybe not like a full send up, but of just like poking at that idea of we sanction experts, we put them in a room and tell them to figure it out. And like, we believe that if you have certain credentials, or if you are, within some corporation or
the right people in the right room.
They can solve it. And that's sort of what
problems
we're discussing. Yeah.
So it is a bit of a satire of kind of think tanks as well.
And I think that we more recently have been zooming out to and thinking about just the role of sci-fi in art. This is an image of the new Afrofuturist period room at the Met in New York, which I think opens up a whole interesting conversation about reparative and recuperative art in a time, in discussing ideas of time zooming forward and backwards in a science fiction way. But basically, as I was saying, we're trying to break open this idea that there is an objective material baseline that everything should work towards. So within the art world, saying that your work has to be marketable, saleable, working within a certain timeline. And just sort of getting at that liberation of imagination to actually improve people's lives. I think that Afrofuturism is a huge inspiration to us in terms of, also with Afro-pessimism, it's sort of acknowledgement of intense horror and sort of horror of both the past and the future, but also the beauty that can be created in the interstices of that, and like how you actually live in alternate ways. So we were thinking a lot about, I think also in our current use of the internet, how the line between art and science has been really separated and professionalized. Whereas maybe if we were like, when's the last time that you could be an artist and a scientist sort of officially? And we're like, oh, the Renaissance, when you could really, as a regular practice, draw from observation, be in a lab as an artist, in a way that's not maybe what we would think of as a design practice, maybe as we have now. And I think that we're interested too, along the lines of UFOs and in this world of deepfakes and things easily fabricated on the internet, of asking what is nature? If you're drawing from nature or from observation, what are you observing? Where is that line, I think, is part of the alien conversation, and sort of what is provable. But yeah, we kind of, in this performance, hope that people seeing us using these really basic techniques that could apply to any profession. Is it scientific observation? Is it sort of a corporate middle management? Is it an art piece? We hope that that sort of gets mapped onto this idea of social practice, of saying that art is not necessarily something you go to a gallery to witness and then you walk away again, or it's not something that you can purchase. It can be something that has an impact on the people around you and maybe is not as inaccessible as a contemporary art world or gallery sort of system would like you to believe. So we hope that our audience approaches it as if they could do it too. I think that's kind of our whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, yeah, I think ultimately also, you know, the idea of trusting your own intuition and trusting kind of like your own creativity and your own imagination is a big part of this performance. And yeah, those things don't necessarily have to be outsourced to, you know, professionals. And I think we talked a little bit about kind of like the fear of being an amateur, you know, whereas in the past, again, when these borders between disciplines were so much more blurry, or as well, there was a much greater passion, I think, for like amateur science and amateur theorizing. And even if people were way off the mark with lots of, you know, crazy theories that they came up with in the 18th and 19th century, like, you know, orgone energy and things like that, I think they still represent something valuable and something that's maybe been lost a bit of just kind of allowing ourselves to be a little more, just be playful and have fun in the realm of ideas and intellect. It doesn't have to be like a really serious, stodgy place all the time.
Yeah, you don't have to be right. And that
Yeah,
I think also, yeah. And in making new mythologies, we talked a lot about maybe the current liberal agnostic sort of, not fear of God, but we've sort of gone down this path of being like, what are all the things we can believe? You know, why are people afraid to imagine sort of spiritual energy into UFOs? I think that's kind of a funny thing too, to be like, let's get really mystical about the office space. So there's sort of this dichotomy of we're spinning these alternate truths for maybe a really bizarre future and figuring out how to tell an imagined public or the actual public of the performance about this deeply like human response to something really bizarre. So yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah, it's like the modern office space as like an alchemist workshop or something, you know. Making things up as you go along, rather than just kind of like following all the set rubrics.
Should we play the game? Do you have time? Do you want to? I think we have time, right?
How are we looking, Abby and
Ellie? you have time.
feel?
So thank you for checking. I think I do want to encourage folks to maybe, while they're playing the game, to actively listen, but also think about questions, because we'll have some time at the end. So, but yeah, you guys take it away.
So how, let's get out of this screen share.
Okay.
So yeah, in advance of this game, I assigned a, should I explain this? Yeah, I guess I
Yeah,
should.
yeah.
Yeah, so I assigned a an alien role to I think to Saskia. Did I give you, which one did I?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Saskia has an alien role, and then Michael has an earthling role. And so they are going to meet for the first time. I also gave them each an objective for this meeting. And so they're gonna have to just improvise this conversation starting right now.
Well, I need my objective really quick.
Oh.
It's okay. It's okay.
Uh-oh.
But yeah, this is one of the many kind of like little processes that we came up with. That would be one of the things that you can do within the performance space to generate ideas and generate, you know, documentation. So this is like a 3-person game where you have 2 people communicating, taking on these hypothetical roles, attempting to communicate with each other. It's kind of like is it categories, the game where you can't say the word that you're thinking of? It's a little like and
It's
then
not
you
that
have
we're speaking different languages, but we are
interlocutor.
coming. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right.
Yeah, it's a vague one, but
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. So we're each trying to communicate our objective to the other person without explicitly stating that objective, because the assumption being that, you know, there's not enough shared context for it to just be like, I want this, and the other being would know what it is that
And
you want.
do you want to figure out what the role is too? We have to figure out what our categories
Yeah,
are.
sure. Yeah. I have a role.
Okay. So that's sort of the two parts of it. So
Right. Nice to meet you.
welcome.
Yeah.
Hello to this meeting.
This is going to be difficult.
Okay.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about this?
Skeptical. I think my my impulse and the impulse of people like me from my planet is to be wary of outsiders. I have a very almost real aversion to the unknown. So I'm having a hard time kind of processing this whole situation. I think I need a little more information before I can understand exactly how I'm feeling. How are you feeling about this situation? I mean, what is, you know, what, I don't even know why you're here. I don't even know what you want.
I feel pretty confident because in my world, in my circle of my profession, we strive to be really perceptive and embrace the unknown and look further down into the paths of the unknown for each other and for people of your kind. I can offer that too. But I think what we really lack on my planet has a different use than it does here on your planet. So I'm struggling to describe what it is that I need, because you use it so differently than we do. And
Gotcha.
I think I need you to tell me about how your physical body runs. The words for that.
Well, what I need has to do with my physical body not running as well as it should.
That's convenient.
So we, you know, the harder we run our bodies, we like to think of we use machine metaphors a lot to describe ourselves, and the harder we run, you know, like machines generally they tend to break down. And I am a person who runs my body very hard, not exactly physically, but mentally, and I need recuperation. That's what I'm looking for. I need to repair my body machine. And this is something that is kind of a culturally enshrined thing with my species. Yeah.
That has to do with mind?
That has to do with recovering from the stress of using your mind and body.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that my thing has to do with something that you do automatically. It seems like I'm observing that you are doing this constantly and not even thinking about it.
Gotcha.
But I don't know how to get it out of the medium that you're in.
Yeah. So The things that I do unconsciously, obviously, are our senses are
Okay.
operate unconsciously. We don't have to think about seeing or breathing or things like that. And what I'm looking for,
That's what it's called. That's what it's called, is breathing.
great.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is important because what I need to know if where you're from, and can I do this process? Will I be able to breathe if I come to where you're from? Because ultimately, that's what I'm looking for. Is I need an escape from my present situation.
Unfortunately, I think that we would have to put you in a special suit.
Okay, gotcha. So you can't offer what I need on your world, but hopefully
Because
I'll be able to
I've
explain
come
to
to
you what I
seek it because I need it for
Mhm.
my new project.
Understandable.
Yeah, we would
Okay.
have to process it.
So you want to understand breathing, which is an involuntary process that we do to transfer chemicals in our atmosphere into into the things that keep us living. Now what
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 chemicals
I'm
do
looking
you
for
use?
is
What chemicals do you use?
we're carbon-based life forms, so a lot of oxygen, nitrogen as well,
That's what I need.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
So
That's what it's called.
this is kind of
That's what you call it.
Cool. Good to know. So
Yeah.
what I need is much more abstract because it's about my mind,
Okay.
right? So we have a physical body, and then we have kind of what runs the show really is you can't really measure it, you can't really see it. It's not,
It's an
it's
electric
connected.
impulse?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, we're not
Okay.
really sure, but we just are, and we think about the world. We think about things around us, and we like interpret kind of our situation and our physical situation in different ways. And right now, like I was saying, is like my brain body machine is kind of breaking down a little bit. And generally in my culture, what we do when that happens is that we have to disengage from our daily activities and go through an extended period where we don't perform any of those daily activities as a means of recovery. We rest. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So it's
Do
like
you cryo freeze?
no. Exactly. We don't change any. We basically just change our physical location.
Okay.
And the activities that we do in a given day.
You don't have a place to do that in your living space?
Well, that's the thing, is that the living space, it's about a lack of familiarity too, right?
Oh.
So we have this kind of desire for novelty, right? And a desire to kind of like escape our day-to-day life, and that kind of combines into this shared cultural ritual where we go to other places and experience other things as a means of making it easier to kind of get through our day-to-day life when we come back to our normal location where we spend all our time.
Okay, you're not talking about full shutdown. You don't need to sleep. You're not trying to sleep.
No, it's not sleeping.
Okay, I thought you were
but
trying.
It does a lot of the stuff that sleep does. It's like a psychological recovery, location-based psychological recovery. Yeah.
Does it engage?
And that also, describing things like that is very much what people in my line of work do. Yeah.
Okay. A location-based. Yeah. Is it something that you are deliberately engaging a sense and then disengaging it?
Yes, exactly. Okay. And usually you have to get permission from other people on when you can engage and disengage from this state.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is it, would you call it a form of entertainment?
Yeah. I mean, theoretically it should be entertaining. It isn't always.
Are you seeking to make a movie on my planet?
I'm not, but that would be a lot of fun. I'm glad you know what movies are. Maybe that's a good thing.
But I'm grasping at straws.
Because again, these are kind of, these are like improv exercises. We can do these kind of ad nauseum. And we got some answers there. I was a military commander looking to engage in tourism.
I thought you were a scientist trying to become a director.
Yeah. But exactly. It's no one has to win these games.
Right.
It really is that process is what the game is about. There's not exactly like a final objective. It's more about kind of recording the process of like how of trying to explain things in a deeper way and free of kind of some of the the assumptions and the biases that we
If you
have
had to
when we
boil it
talk
down.
about things and just assume that we're all kind of have a mutual understanding or definition of these things. So that's one example of how we were kind of one of the tools that we would use to kind of like, I don't know, expand our approach to just like theorizing in this performance and make it a performance, make kind of just generating ideas of almost like a work of expanded theater. So
It's funny to watch myself want to make it more sci-fi than it has to be.
yeah,
Obviously.
totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
My job was therapist also.
Cool.
Yeah. So thank you, Ive, for assigning that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we thought also that since there are three of us, there could be a mediator
Yeah.
present in a lot of these exercises too, for somebody to be like, wait. So
Yeah.
we're gonna
And the
explore that.
mediator would give the people their roles and kind of
Yeah.
record the communication, and then that would be documented, and then that document would kind of enter the record or enter the the paper monument that would be kind of the performance space after we're done with it, the performance space as we leave it once the performance is done, that's kind of the monument that we're looking at. Yeah, so I don't know.
So thank you for
Awesome.
watching.
Thank you all so much for demonstrating that. We've already gotten some people in the chat saying thank you for how entertaining and inventive it was. Yeah, and fascinating. Like I thought you, Michael, might be a travel agent, and I thought about how, like, I know certain young people that have no idea what a travel agent is because there's not. Why would you need one if you have kayak?
Well, I'm familiar in the abstract too, but yeah, I can't remember the last time I used one.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So we just have a couple minutes left together. So I want to encourage, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or wave us down, unmute yourself. We'd love to hear from all of you. I have some thoughts. My notes look like a serial killer here. I was writing down some different references and thoughts. It was just fascinating to see the direction.
Yeah, Abby, I can kick it off. I kind of don't have a fully formed question, but you were kind of just getting it to it at the end of what you were saying. And I'm just thinking about how you're like creating this monument of ephemera. And I'm wondering how you think about like archives and archival practices within your practice. And if you distinguish that from the artwork, or if the process is very much kind of the point of that all. So could you speak a little bit to how you all think about that, both in your performance and video work?
Yeah, I feel like artists are they're forced to archive their work in a way. Like, I mean, it's not always something we just have to do just out of obligation, but, we need to build up this CV and have a website and all of these things. So in that way, it's just kind of integral to our responsibilities. And where was I going with that? But also, I was also going to say, like, there's the role of a theorist and like an art historian who tends to kind of like encapsulate what the current art movements are doing and what the meaning is behind those movements. But then there's also a lot of overlap, and artists have to do this as well in their artist statements. And I think sometimes I've experienced times when I like got lost in the theorizing and I needed to take a step back and just get back into art making, and vice versa. So it can be a messy process.
Yeah, I think that's interesting to think about the kind of like paper monument in relation to an archive. I think that's an interesting relationship. I think it's almost like thinking about, obviously a reference point that we didn't really get to is also the movement to bring down lots of monuments that's been happening over the last maybe like half decade. And I'm sure everyone's aware of that, particularly obviously Civil War monuments and memorials in the US have been kind of a flashpoint for this. And I think the relation of our kind of paper monument to an archive, which ultimately the goal would be to take all the printed matter from that performance and archive it and make like a publication of it. And I think that is kind of like, it's almost like the relationship of like a monument to Stonewall Jackson, how that's related to like a book about the Civil War. You know, it's like a public artistic shorthand. It's giving you very little of the actual information about, you know, what this thing is about. And then you have, you know, you could have a much more like in-depth source that you can go to find that information. And in our case, we have kind of like the aftermath of our performance, which is this visual spectacle. But since, you know, in our original conception of this performance, the audience doesn't enter the space at all. So they're not necessarily reading all these documents or getting to get the actual granular information. And then the archiving of those documents would be kind of like, you know, the history book about the subject who is being memorialized.
I also do like to think about monuments themselves as archive, like as a slice of an archive too.
Yeah,
That if you
exactly.
have, this is what somebody cared about. This person cared about this thing at this time. Here's all the documentation about how they contacted somebody to sculpt it, how they secured the site, how there's an archive naturally around that too. And then there's sort of like scattered examples of, I think that if you think about all the monuments to one thing across the US, for example, that is an archive in itself, which is kind of cool. And I have never made like an art piece that is an archive, but I am interested in bookmaking and printing practice. I think we all are, obviously, and think that it's fun to say that this book also has a surround of notes and whatever, thinking, sketching in itself, that it is like a piece of an archive that is itself. So
Yeah,
Awesome. Thank you guys. That's super helpful, like framing. But it's an interesting way to think too of like why, you know, kind of monuments have these like inherent problematic things about them, because they are just this slice of something and there's so much more context around that. And how do we kind of grapple with that as the public and as institutions? So thank you.
And we have some really lovely and thought-provoking comments by Karen in the chat. And I wanted to kind of take part of one and end tonight's program with the question. Karen said, I like the way that listening was an important element in the process, the performance, and the world needs to listen more. And I wondered if you all could talk about the role that listening, or maybe more broadly collaboration, plays in your practice. Because as a person who makes work individually, I'm kind of mystified by how you all come together and make something together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've always, you know, like Lino Kino from the beginning was all about the importance of making things, or like bringing lots of people together, and the value of that artistically. There's a term, I can't remember, I think, okay, again, this is going back to more Brian Eno, because he does have a lot of great, really concise kind of thoughts on collective creativity, but he uses a term called scenius, which I think is pretty charming. So combination of scene and genius, where genius is very much kind of like a solitary thing. We think of it as like, you know, the purview of an individual. Scenius is his idea of the kind of greater creative heights that you can reach when you have a critical mass of people working together. So for me, I think, I mean, for a long time, this idea that you kind of like, you kind of get the most interesting stuff when you bring lots of different people together and have them work collaboratively has been like really at the root of what I've personally been trying to do for a long time. Yeah.
And I feel like in Lino Kino, the line between like just chatting with your friends about this thing that you're excited about and then making it into, oh, this is actually a conversation about this performance that we're working on, that line is thin. And that's what makes it so amazing and also hard to describe, is like, yeah, our meetings for this are also like, oh yeah, I read this thing and it's really interesting. You're like, oh yeah, as a friend, like, what do you know? So there's like kind of, sometimes we decide to work and sometimes the work is play. So
yeah, a lot of this performance is kind of trying to systematize like really chaotic, involuntary processes and kind of like put those on display a bit more and make those kind of more comprehensible, I guess, to an audience.
Yeah, it's about collaboration.
The work that goes on in the background is kind of what we're trying to foreground, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a quote, I forget, I don't know who said this, but it's an old quote and it goes like this, in dark times, from dark times comes singing about those dark times or something like that. And yeah, so it's like, you know, we've been in this dark time, you know, the pandemic, and it's been isolating, but at the same time, it's broken down a lot of bureaucratic barriers. You know, suddenly we're a lot of, at least white collar workers anyway, are not like stuck in their offices and suddenly they're at home with family and they're like trying to figure out how to reconnect. And of course, you know, people who are not white collar workers are dealing with their own challenges as well, and having to kind of, you know, work as caregivers in clinics and that kind of a thing. And basically this whole thing is kind of like, this whole event is kind of just like giving new meaning to what it means to connect with other humans, and reinventing what friendship and love and empathy all mean amongst ourselves.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect
Nice.
place to end.
Yeah, nice.
It was connecting with all of you. Thank you all so much for sharing about your project, and thanks for everyone in the audience for being here with us. It was great to spend the hour. So I'll let Lino Kino say the last word. You want to say goodbye?
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for coming.
We're really flattered, I think, and honored that everyone took the time to be here. Yeah, thank you so much.
Have a great afternoon.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.